Welcome to the 3DownNation podcast. I'm John Hodge, joined by JC Abbott. JC, how you doing today?
I'm a little bit tired, to be entirely honest with you, Hodge. The Sunday night game to Monday morning podcast turnaround, it's brutal, folks. Especially when you're as slow as I am typing, because I'm up all night writing my article, and then I've got to drag my butt out of bed in the morning. I think I crawled to my computer to record this podcast. I'm not even wearing pants, Hodge. So let's be frank.
Oh, don't tell the people that. I don't want to know it. The people don't want to know that. You also did a number of radio interviews this morning. You're a popular guy, especially in that marketplace. So that's great. That's good for you. And if tiredness equates to nasal breathing sounds, I think you have reached a new level of tiredness because I am hearing them so loud and clear. I'm gonna have to edit the you know what out of this podcast episode. Hopefully our listeners are spared some of the nasal cavity breathing that is JC Abbott. It really is.
In fairness, it's not nasal cavity breathing, Hodge, because I can't breathe through my nose. It's all through the mouth.
Well, whatever it is Darth Vader-like and ominous. But I have a quick topic I want to discuss, and I want your take. I was hoping Justin would be here because I feel like he would probably have the opposite take as you, but I want our listeners' take. So I was in Toronto this past weekend. I got to cover the Winnipeg Blue Bombers game there on Saturday. And while I was packing for my trip, I packed a carry-on as I always do. I would rather die than check a bag, to be quite frank. But I usually bring my work bag as like a secondary thing. And I thought about it. I'm like, you know what? I'm only going to use this work bag to cover the game. I don't want to bother doing that. I'm just going to put my laptop in my carry-on, and then I'll just bring my laptop to the stadium with me. And my wife, who grew up in Toronto, lived there for 20 years, said, well, how are you getting the game back? And I said, well, I'm going to take the TTC. And she kind of looked at me. She's like, it's an expensive laptop. Like TTC, you never know. I think you should bring a work bag. And I was like, fully get your point. I don't want to schlep a work bag just for that. And my work bag is also a nice looking, expensive looking work bag. Full disclosure, I did not pay for it. It was a gift from my dad. And I'm like, I don't know if I I might be just as likely to get robbed if I bring the work bag. So finally, I came up with a solution, which I thought was brilliant. My wife did not think was brilliant. And people I've shared this with are pretty polarized. So what I did is I packed a garbage bag, something that has essentially no weight.
Whoa.
Something that doesn't weigh anything. Bag? A black garbage bag. And I stuck my laptop in there and my charger in there. And I sat on the TTC with what appeared to be a bag of garbage.
Are you a hobo?
Well, that was part of the strategy. Like I don't want to get robbed. No one's stealing garbage. And so I just carried, and also full disclosure, it was supposed to rain that day, and it did rain. So that was my other concern. I don't want the bag to get, or the laptop to get wet. So by carrying a waterproof bag, and my work bag is leather, by the way, so not a waterproof bag, I thought I cheated the system, but some people have told me this is hobo-ish and terrible. So if you're listening, whether it's social media, YouTube comments, whatever, let me know, is the garbage bag brilliant or is the garbage bag garbage? I want to know, because I thought it was smart. Other people have said it's smart, but some people have told me it is terrible and hobo-ish. And clearly JC appears to be in the latter category.
You know, Hodge, I'm really glad you did this, because all the time I hear from my mother, who's an avid listener of this podcast, despite the fact that she understands very little about what we're talking about. She always says, why can't you look more like that man, John Hodge? He's so put together with his nicely trimmed facial hair and his nice hats. And next time she says that, I'm just going to say, yes, but he carries his work equipment in a garbage bag to stadiums. It's not very professional, Hodge.
I would amend that slightly. I would say he carried, past tense. It's not something I currently do. And stadium, singular. I only did it once. You gotta
lean into the aesthetic. Now you're the garbage bag guy.
But I do in my work bag. I've got like 50 things in my work bag, because anything I ever think like, oh, like I cover a game or an event, I'm like, oh, it would have been nice to have this. I stick it in the bag and I just carry it around. So I'm going to put a garbage bag in there full time, if for no other reason than post game. Like if I'm in a downpour, I can now take my work bag, stick the whole thing in a garbage bag, and it won't get wet, because I don't want my work bag to get wet. So that is a little bit of a hack. But I appreciate that I probably don't want to get in the permanent habit of bringing the laptop in a garbage bag. By the way, for anybody wondering, I was actually approached on the TTC by someone who tried to sell me alcohol. And fortunately, 15 years of PSAs growing up, I was like, no means no. And then I'm like, oh, right. I'm a grown man, and though I'm pretty sure buying alcohol from a random person on the TTC is illegal, it's probably not like morally or ethically wrong. For the record, no, I did not buy any alcohol. Somebody else approached me and asked me if I was going to. I thought he said dirty bastard comedy, and I'm like, what? And I was like, no. And then I Googled what he had said, and it was Bastid comedy. There was a comedian with the last name Bastid. Anyway, so there are characters on the TTC. For the record, I did not feel unsafe. The train I was in was clean. We're all good. I mostly walked around Toronto. Day of the game, it was 33 degrees, and I'm not walking an hour there and back in that type of heat. And that's not with humidity. With the Humidex, oh my God, it was terrible. But I had a great time in Toronto. Game was fun to cover. It was a good time.
It was not a good week overall, Hodge, for professionalism from 3Down at games, because I also had an incident on the Winnipeg Place. I wasn't carrying a garbage bag. I was walking down Robson Street to get to the stadium, and all of a sudden I felt like something hit my shoulder, and I looked down, and some sort of mysterious thick red liquid had dropped from a tree into my white shirt. All over my arm. I'm pretty sure it was tomato. I looked up and there was like a dirty dish rag hanging in the branch of a tree and it had dripped all over me. Absolutely disgusting. I had to stop a passing waitress and ask for a napkin from one of the outdoor patios. But yeah, all over my white shirt. It was not a good look when you're going off to work to be professional looking.
Well, I mean, it sounds like it wasn't your fault. But now that we've disturbed our listeners, let's get into the show. My goodness. Today, we're discussing the Edmonton Elks' disastrous protection issues.
Chad Kelly being placed on Toronto's 6-game injured list.
The Ottawa Redblacks not making a coaching change on their bye week.
Deshaun Amos receiving a max fine for his hit on Drew Brown.
And McLeod Bethel Thompson feeling a little salty. But first,
Robert Carter Jr. nabbed what might be the greatest interception in CFL history on Sunday night when he picked off Bo Levi Mitchell up the seam in the end zone on a pass intended for Brendan O'Leary Orange. Hodge, was it the best pick that you've ever seen?
In the CFL, yes. Ever seen, like if we're counting collegiate football on both sides of the border, if we're counting NFL, if we're counting everything else, that's a tougher thing to say, but I thought this was not just the best interception I've seen in the CFL. It honestly might be the best play I've ever seen in the CFL. And I know that there's always recency bias to take into account. This play literally happened, as of this recording, 12 hours ago. It's easy to remember plays that have happened 5, 20, 50 years ago. And obviously lots of CFL games were never even televised. So some games, dating back way, way, way back into the annals of league history have kind of been lost to the sands of time. That being said, if you'd asked me yesterday, before the BC Hamilton game, what the best play in CFL history was, I would probably have to say the S.J. Green catch from the 2010 CFL regular season opener in Regina. I've probably seen that play 100 times, and every time I watch that play, I swear that the ball is going to fall incomplete. Even though I've seen it 100 times. I'm like, he's not going to make the catch this time. That catch is impossible to make. And then, of course, he does. This play might beat that. Honestly, it might. This might be a better play. And I thought Janarian Grant's punt return touchdown from a couple years ago was right up there. When that punt return touchdown happened, it also happened in Regina. I remember reaching out to people saying, hey, is that the best punt return touchdown in CFL history? I talked to Henry Gizmo Williams about his punt return touchdowns and the one that he had that some people were considering the best in CFL history. For the record, the Giz thought that his was still better than Janarian Grant's. Watching them back to back respectfully, I would probably, if I'm putting on my analyst hat, have to disagree with the Giz. As much as he's a legend, he had amazing punt return touchdowns. I think Grant's was a little better. This might take the cake over everything, JC. I know, again, it just happened, but I've watched that replay from like 4 different angles. I've probably seen it 50 times. It was truly electric. What was it like when it happened in the building?
I mean, I couldn't even believe it when it first happened. And it was right in the end zone, close to us, on the opposite corner of the end zone. But just an absolutely phenomenal catch. And what I think separates it, Hodge, from other plays of that nature was the cleanliness with which it was made, right? There wasn't a bobble at all once he stuck out that one hand. He didn't really have to trap it against his body, although he finished the catch by bringing it in. It was pure stick it out, stab it, bring it in. I don't know that I've ever seen anything quite that spectacular and perfect at the same time. Now, for the record, Robert Carter Jr. has done this before. He did it in college at Robert Morris. I believe they showed the highlight of that on the TSN broadcast. He was asked after the game which of those two interceptions was more spectacular. I think this one, just from an overall play standpoint, was better. He disagreed. He said the one in college was better. His reasoning, Hodge, when he did that one-handed catch, he did it with a broken hand. So he felt that was a more spectacular play. It's safe to say this will not be the last amazing interception we see from Robert Carter Jr. in the CFL. He's been a tremendous find for the BC Lions this year.
Absolutely. And I was really curious because he's, as he said, a rookie, what his vertical was coming out. And looking at his draft scout page, which is, at least to my knowledge, the best place to find centralized data on testing from smaller schools and things like that, guys coming at it from the NCAA. He didn't have one. So I don't know if he just didn't participate due to injury or what, but I'd be really curious to know what his hops are like because it was unbelievable the way that he almost seemed to float like a weightless superhero into the end. Like the effortlessness with which he did that was truly remarkable. That then and just to like get up there and get a piece of the ball, right, is special enough. But to then, as you said, stick it almost like you'd stick a fork into a boiled potato and just pull it down effortlessly, survive contact with the ground. Unbelievable play, and it's one that we're going to see, I think, for the next 50 years, honestly. And not even just on CFL highlight reels. Like, we're going to see this thing on just remarkable play lists, period. So, credit to Carter Jr. Unfortunate for him, it came in a losing effort. We'll talk about that a little bit more later on in the show. But truly, unbelievable. The Edmonton Elks ignited a social media firestorm when they allowed 8 sacks against the Saskatchewan Roughriders, creating a conversation about the league's protection issues. JC, you've written about this recently. Why did the Elks get so eviscerated, and do you think this is a sign of a bigger trend?
There are a number of layers to this particular onion, Hodge, and you know I love onions. So I'll start with the Elks specifically first, and then maybe we can peel it back and talk about some of the wider issues in the league. This was on the front here in this particular game. In a lot of cases, I did not think that the Edmonton offensive line played particularly well. Cody Fajardo took a lot of the blame post-game. That's what a leader does. That's what a starting quarterback does in a situation like that. I don't think he's entirely blameless. We all know that Cody is a guy who, with the way he plays and the speed at which he gets the ball out of his hand, tends to give up more sacks than the average Bear, right? This has been a trend throughout his career. You certainly remember it from his time in Saskatchewan. That did not help the issues, but the offensive line didn't block well. And part of the reason why they didn't block well, Hodge, and an element that I don't necessarily think is getting talked about enough, is because their offensive coordinator didn't put them in a position to succeed, right? The Edmonton Elks in the last 2 weeks have run the football 5 times each game with running backs. They've got Justin Rankin and Javon Leake in the backfield. For all the finger pointing you want to do at this Edmonton front this year, and deservedly so, last season they were the highest graded offensive line in the CFL, right? With 3 of the same starters, and they added a CFL All-Star in David Beard in the offseason. Guys like Brett Boyko and Martez Ivey and Mark Corte haven't forgotten how to play football, but they are offensive linemen that I think in general are better run blockers than pass blockers. They need to put defenses on the back foot. They need a system that works to their advantage. Uh, and Jordan McSimmet hasn't done that, right? He's abandoned the run game consistently this year. He hasn't played to Edmonton's strengths. And I think Saskatchewan knew that. They knew that for the entirety of that game, they could pin their ears back and get after the passer. They didn't have to worry about a single other thing, and they had the success like it. So I think there needs to be a fundamental change in terms of the play calling there if you want to have this group at least return to some semblance of the efficiency they showed last year. Because you're not going to do it if you just drop back to past 30 or 40 times a game. You don't have that personnel.
I couldn't agree more, JC. And look, we have to give credit to the Riders, right? 2 sacks for Micah Johnson, 2 for Shane Ray, 2 for Malik Carney. That D-line is special, right? They rotate guys so they're fresh come late in the fourth quarter. And when you've got a situation like that, right, where you're fresh late in the game, your pass rushers can pin their ears back, right? Everybody knows Edmonton's throwing the ball. They were down multiple scores. You don't have to be gap sound. And with some quarterbacks, like Trey Ford being a perfect example, you still have to be contained sound when you rush the passer, because if he gets outside of your defensive end and runs up the field, he's going to kill you with his legs potentially. Cody Fajardo coming into the CFL, like he attended the NFL Combine. I looked it up this morning in 2015. He ran 4.63 at 225 pounds, which is a very legitimate score, right? Like 4.63, you're not a burner as a quarterback, but you can certainly hurt opponents with their legs. And I do think that one thing that has inhibited Cody Fajardo late in his career is the fact that he still plays like he is a 4.63 guy, and he is not a 4.63 guy. Just using the eyeball test, I would guess Cody Fajardo right now is like a 4.85, 4.90 guy. In other words, he has gone from a not unbelievably fast quarterback, but quite a fast quarterback, to a guy who is very much average speed at best as a quarterback. I don't think he's elusive as he thinks he is. I don't think that his body clock has kept up, like his internal clock has developed alongside his actual speed clock, right? What he's able to do, how he's able to get outside of the pocket. So you got to give credit to the Riders. I think you have to criticize Cody. You also have to criticize the O-line. I agree with what you're saying, JC. It's the same O-line coaches last year at Steven Sorrell's. It's the same offensive line mostly across the board. But obviously, when you've got 4 rushers against 5 blockers, that leaves 3 one-on-ones. And you've got to win a good amount of those one-on-ones if you are those offensive linemen. And they did not do nearly good enough of a job. So when you have a breakdown like this, it's never the fault of any one thing. I agree that the offensive coordinator, Jordan McSimmet, wears some of the blame. The offensive line wears some of the blame. The Cody Fajardo wears some of the blame. And you also have to tip your cap to the Saskatchewan Roughriders, right? I think all those things are factors. The thing that I find really frustrating is that for whatever reason, this season, and I think there's probably one individual who's maybe, leading the charge on this a little bit, but we see one game happen, and then for whatever reason, we forget that this league has been around since the mid-1950s, and in many ways has been around for over a century, right? Certainly the Grey Cup goes back, I think it's 116 years now, 117 years now. I know the 112th game is happening this year, but obviously we didn't have a Grey Cup in 2020. We didn't have a Grey Cup previously due to some global military conflicts. So I looked up some numbers, right? And right now, the CFL, we don't have stats through week 8. Obviously, this number will go up through week 8 because of this game, which was a bit of an anomaly with 8 sacks against one team. But through week 7, we had 3.3 sacks per game so far in 2025. Since the CFL started keeping this statistic in 1978, that is literally the lowest amount ever. Ever. And that's like by quite a large margin. Only twice since 1978 have CFL games averaged fewer than 4 sacks per game. The 2 times that's happened, first happened in 2002 with 3.86 sacks per game, and it happened last year in 2024 with 3.99 sacks per game. For anybody wondering, the highest number of sacks allowed per game ever happened in 1986 with 7.63, which, if you're good at math, is well over double what is currently happening. So I get frustrated sometimes when one game happens and everybody goes, wow, this one game that's a one off between two teams is now suddenly emblematic of a great systemic crisis of the CFL. And it's like, what are we talking about? Like, when one company crashes in the stock market, we don't then go, wow, this one company's failing is emblematic of the entire stock market. And we need to, and it's like, what? It's just one, this is one data point. This is one company. One company does not really have an effect at all on the larger stock market. Even a giant company would not bring down the stock market single-handedly, maybe by half a point if it's a really big company, but by and large, one company's not enough to change anything. Or same with the real estate market, right? If one house sells for way above asking in Toronto, that bears no bearing on the rest of the real estate market in Toronto. These things have to be measured month to month or even year to year. Measuring them sale to sale is insane, and I don't like it when rhetoric in the CFL seems to change game by game. Like, these are data points that take months and, better yet, years to change. So obviously, the protection at Edmonton was not good enough. I don't think anybody would discredit that, but I get frustrated when one game happens, everybody overreacts to like an insane degree, and then when you step in and go, hold on, I think you guys are overacting, it's like, well, you're just a CFL apologist and you're afraid of change and you're making excuses and you're lying. And it's like, I'm the one looking back at almost 50 years of data. The data very clearly shows that we have fewer sacks in the CFL than ever right now, and that the trend over the last 50 years has been sacks are way down. I'm not for a second suggesting that there's not room for improvement in the CFL. We're always talking about ways to improve the CFL. We're always talking about how to hold teams, players accountable. But to me, this was just a bad game. Teams are allowed to have bad games. This is a team that was adjusting to a new quarterback, right? A new drop. Obviously, Cody Fajardo does not move as fast as Trey Ford because nobody in the CFL does, certainly at the quarterback position. Let one game be a bad game. We don't have to have a league-wide crisis conversation after every single game. I'm so tired of it. It's just a game. One game is allowed to be great. One game is allowed to be bad. One game is allowed to be whatever, because this is live sports. Anything can happen. And that is true regardless of whether you're talking amateur, professional, NFL, indoor. It doesn't matter what. It doesn't matter the sport. There are thousands of terrible sporting games played every single year. And that's allowed because it would be impossible to make them all good. So obviously the Elks need to improve, but no, this is not the sign of a greater crisis or a greater trend in the CFL. I'm sorry, it's not. And if you feel that way, then I'm very interested to hear why specifically you feel that way, because the data, which is publicly available, literally points to the exact opposite.
I sympathize with your exhaustion on that point, Hodge. And speaking of data not backing up some of the narratives, we've had a lot of discussion recently about this supposed problem and how it's related to Canadian offensive linemen playing because of the ratio, not being good enough against a fresh rotation of American pass rushers. And I did a deep dive into those numbers, and none of the data seems to back that up. Now, you're not going to hear me say that Canadian blockers are better than American blockers, because the data doesn't back that up either. They're better in some categories. They generally give up less pressure, or at least they have over the last 3 years since Pro Football Focus has started tracking that advanced data. This year, they're actually, up until week 7, were grading out a little bit higher on average than Americans were, which has not been the trend over the past 3 years, but that was promising. But in general, the marks across the board and the difference between Canadian and Americans is marginal at best in either direction, right? It's pretty consistent. There's a lot of protection issues in the CFL at times, not a monumental crisis, but there are going to be mistakes and teams that struggle giving up sacks. And it's easy to point the finger, I think, particularly in this case, because we've seen the two offensive lines struggling the most in Edmonton and Toronto, both starting for Canadians, and say, see, this is a CFO only problem. This is a ratio problem. But that ignores the fact of why the four Canadians are starting for those units. And unlike it was in the past, where I think starting a full Canadian offensive line or a Canadian at right tackle was uber coveted, I think in a lot of cases, these guys are starting because there's no better option, Hodge. Like, look at those two teams. Toronto, their worst offensive lineman this season has been George Moore, their rookie left tackle. He has not been good this year. When they tried to have another American play at right tackle in Hampton Ergel, he gave up 11 pressures in one game. 28% of his pass blocking snaps, he allowed a pressure. That is the worst of anyone in the league. So when you've got Ryan Hunter and Aneem Donkwa and John Boss in there struggling throughout the season at right tackle, and you say, well, I want these guys replaced by an American, that's the American who would replace him. And he was provably worse in that one game. You look at Edmonton. Mark Corte got his butt kicked in that game on a couple of reps by Micah Johnson. There is no disputing that. But he was playing at left guard over Mark Evans, who has been statistically Edmonton's worst offensive lineman this season, both in his time at guard and in his time at tackle. He's been a really weak spot for that offensive line that they were trying to plug. So if you want to take Brett Boyko or Mark Corte off the field, well, you've got to, or Gregor McKellar for that matter, you've got to put in Mark Evans. And he hasn't been up to snuff. So these teams don't have the bodies to replace these players, and the Canadians are better than what they have in the building. That's a talent recruitment issue. It's a scouting issue. It's hard to find offensive linemen and develop them. That's not a ratio issue in my mind.
Well, and let's use Brett Boyko as an example. This is a guy who played collegiately at UNLV and then spent 4 years in the NFL. So like this guy has almost a decade of American coaching and experience. He didn't dress for a ton of NFL games, but he won a freaking Super Bowl. Like, this is a guy who has been around for. Or did Brett Boyko win a Super Bowl? Or am I thinking Ryan Hunter? Ryan Hunter won a Super Bowl. My apologies. Well, Ryan Hunter's another good example. He played at Bowling Green, spent 4 years in the NFL, won a Super Bowl. Brett Boyko, again, UNLV, spent, I think it was 4 years in the NFL, right? Again, didn't play a ton, but like the point is, if there are Canadian offensive linemen, Hunter is Canadian, he's from North Bay, Ontario. Brett Boyko is Canadian, he's from Saskatoon, Saskatchewan. Like these are guys who are going to the States for like a decade and getting top level coaching, nutrition, all of those things, development. And they come to the CFL and we go, this guy sucks because he's Canadian. It's like, what are we talking about? Like this guy came from the same exact system that produced just about every American offensive lineman in the CFL. The fact that they're from here, if all you're doing is looking at passports and that's the way that you're determining whether a guy is good or not, I'm sorry, that is exactly the opposite of what an analyst should be doing. We should watch these players on tape and judge them accordingly. Obviously, the statistics can help, but every statistic has context, right? When you're in the fourth quarter and you're down by multiple scores and you're in 5 or 6R all the time, in other words, like you've got 5 or 6 receivers and very little extra or no extra protection, you're far more likely to give up a sack than in the first quarter when it's 2nd and 2 and the defense has no idea whether you're passing the ball, running the ball, and you're snapping the ball out of a formation that could be either and has extra protection. Like obviously late in the game, you're more likely to give up sacks, especially because there's not as much to lose late in the game. It's like, well, we're down 10. If we take a sack, it doesn't really matter. There's 4 minutes left. Like, we're just in desperation mode. It's the same thing with turnover on downs, right? We've seen a ton of turnovers on downs so far this season when teams are like, well, there's 1 minute left in the game. Obviously, we're going to gamble on third down. and they chuck it up, and oh, it's incomplete. Okay, well, shoot, at least we tried. And then we bury them. It's like, well, can you believe they had 7 turnovers? And it's like, yeah, because they turned the ball over 3 times in the last 5 minutes, gambling on third down, which was the right decision. Like, bad on them for not executing better on third down, but like, I get, like, there's nothing wrong with the decisions. The only thing I'll throw in here with this QB protection talk is Davis Alexander, right, has missed multiple games now due to a hamstring injury. That hamstring injury had nothing to do with protection. That was just bad luck. Nathan Rourke missed multiple games due to an oblique injury. That had nothing to do with protection. That had to do with the way he throws the football with high velocity. Vernon Adams Jr. left last week's game against Montreal. That had nothing to do with protection. He took off running and had ample opportunity to slide and instead decided to take on 2 defenders at once, and he got his bell rung. So yes, there are instances, I'm not suggesting for a second there's not, where quarterbacks have been hurt as a result of QB, of right protection breaking down. I'll also point out that Drew Brown was knocked out of this most recent game due to an illegal hit. Obviously, Deshaun Amos, we'll talk about that a little bit later in the show. Trevor Harris as well. So, like, it's also on defenders to deliver clean hits. Yes, clean hits can still result in injuries, like Zach Collaros leaving the game, for example, in week 7 at home against the, I'm blanking on the team that they played, against the Calgary Stampeders. That was the Clarence Hicks hit. So that can still happen. But my point is, like, half the quarterback injuries this year have been either non-contact or the quarterback actively seeking out contact. And that's just going to happen, right? Obviously, we always want to protect quarterbacks, but QB's got to protect themselves. And also, some things are always just fluky things are going to happen. Cody Fajardo pulled a hamstring last year. That had nothing to do with protection. Davis Alexander did a hamstring as well this year. I don't know why Montreal quarterbacks are out here pulling hamstrings. It's just a weird trend, apparently. Has nothing to do with protection. So, yes, protection could be better. Yes, we should try to make sure it's better. Are we a part of some type of crisis? No. And I think it's silly to point at any one game and say, wow, this is really proof that systemically there's this huge underlying issue. Like, no, there's just not. This is a league that used to have 7.5 sacks a game. We're below half that right now. I don't know what else people really want.
The Toronto Argonauts have officially placed quarterback Chad Kelly on the 6-game injured list. Hodge, you were there in Toronto this week. Did he suffer a setback?
No, I asked Ryan Dinwiddie that, and he made it clear, no, he hasn't suffered a setback, and he reiterated the points that we've heard him make for the last month, which is that we want Chad to be able to protect himself by being mobile and running around and really trusting that leg that, of course, he fractured during last year's East Final late against the Montreal Alouettes. And I asked about this kind of, again, not unprecedented rehab regime that he has, but certainly an odd one, where he is splitting time between Toronto and Buffalo, New York, his off-season home. Obviously, Toronto and Buffalo are very close, but they are on opposite sides of the border. And Dinwiddie just said, yeah, he has a trainer in Buffalo who he really likes working with, who he really enjoys getting the opportunity to work with, and he found it has been very, very, productive. And he's with working with this trainer, he's seen leaps and bounds of improvement, or he's improving at least certainly faster in Buffalo than he is in Toronto, which I think you could actually take as a bit of a weird shot against his own medical team, which is kind of odd, but whatever. Maybe this trainer in Buffalo is a quarterback specialist who specializes in busted legs. I don't know. Dinwiddie did not offer any details about who this trainer is, and Kelly can't speak to it because he hasn't been available to the media, I don't think, all year. That said, or at least I've not seen any quotes that he's offered all year. Regardless, this is a weird circumstance in Toronto. I do think Nick Arbuckle having a great performance against the Winnipeg Blue Bombers takes some pressure off the Argos. Obviously, they got to win. 2-5, not a good record, but they're trending in the right direction. Arbuckle is great against the Blue Bombers. He has a chance to dunk on them again this week as the Argonauts are scheduled to play at Princess Auto Stadium in Week 9. But the situation is weird, right? Like, Dinwiddie made it clear a month ago, yeah, we think the timeline is like Week 5. And then it was like, the timeline's Week 7. And when I said, when I was speaking with Ryan Dinwiddie, I said, like, could Chad play next week against Winnipeg? And he said, yeah, maybe. And I said, okay, so, like, is this a week-to-week injury? And he said, yeah, it would be fair to say week to week. And then I listened to a subsequent interview he did later that day, or maybe the next day, and he said, well, we're calling it day to day or week to week. And it was like, oh, so it's not necessarily week to week. It could be day to day. So like day to day to me means, yeah, like he can maybe play right now. So the handling of this injury has been very weird. Obviously, media coverage in Toronto is not as consistent as other CFL markets, which I think is why your average CFL fan's been a little bit confused from time to time. It's like, what the heck is going on with Chad Kelly? Suffice to say, having been there on the ground, it is a weird situation. I was surprised that Chad Kelly got 6 games because I literally spoke to Dinwiddie about this on Thursday and news broke Saturday that this move happened. It certainly seemed like Kelly was trending in the right direction, but you also have to wonder, for a guy who quite literally snapped his tibia and his fibula, like what does the future look like for Chad Kelly? I don't want to speculate. I don't like speculating about injuries, but just based on what Ryan Dinwiddie has communicated over the past month or so, he does not seem to be as close as this team thought he would be. And that makes me question, what does the future hold for Chad Kelly, right? What does success look like at this point? Does it look like he's going to be 100% on Labor Day and look like the MOP that he once was? Or does it mean that they're going to shut him down for the whole season? And I think that's a reasonable question to ask because, again, Ryan Dinwiddie has not been very consistent in at least following up on what he's previously said. And I don't know if that's him willfully misleading the media in the hopes of maybe, getting one up on other CFL teams, or if he's been legitimately honest this whole time and just the rehab's been unexpected. But again, he's been reiterating there was no setback. So it's a weird situation. I feel confused, and I wish I had more clear answers for fans and our listeners and our viewers because I know they want answers. Those are the best answers I got, JC. They are.
I think you summed up most of the elements of that extremely succinctly, Hodge, because it is a bizarre situation. But the element you didn't touch on is the salary cap, right? And the Toronto Argonauts are going to get some cap relief here by putting Chad Kelly on the 6 game, so long as he lasts all 6 games on the 6 game. But the question I have is, why didn't it happen sooner, right? And I know that they were trying to get him out to practice to see him and evaluate him. But as soon as you realized that he wasn't going to be ready for a couple of weeks, which I think they recognized very early on, they should have immediately 6-gamed him, just in case. Because you can always take a guy off early and pay the penalty for all the salary he incurred while he was on that 6 game and have that added to the cap after the fact. That's not a problem. But you can't retroactively 6-game a guy when he's been out for 7 games on the 1-game injured list. That's not how that works, because he had been allowed to practice during this time. That feels like an act of mismanagement, quite frankly, by the Toronto Argonauts, in my estimation, to let it go on that long before making a decision of this nature, especially when the guy is not even on your practice field all the time and he's heading back across the border to Buffalo, which I don't have a problem with, but would indicate to me that he is several weeks away and that you probably should have 6-gamed him earlier. It's nice to have that cap relief now, but it would have been a whole lot better to get it earlier, right? And I just don't understand why the Toronto Argonauts didn't do that after getting eyes on Chad Kelly for a week or two, evaluating him and saying, hey, we can kick this down the road. We'll check back in 5 weeks when you're allowed to practice, but it's not happening right now. Go back to Buffalo and do your thing. That would have been the smart move here. I can't see any logical reason why you wouldn't do that.
Yeah, I think it is the practice issue, right, that you said. Like, they wanted Chad to be able to practice, and I'm looking at their schedule right now. Week 1, their game was June 6th. Week 4, their game was June 29th. So when you're on the 6th game, you're allowed to practice the last 2 weeks of that. So that would be 4 weeks of non-practice, 2 weeks of practice. So if you put Chad on the 6-game injured list for week 1, that means that he's not able to practice essentially for the whole month of June. And then he would be able to practice week 5, and they had a bye week 6, so week 7 he can practice, and then he would have been eligible to play this past game, week 8 against Winnipeg. So and there were, by the way, days in June where Chad Kelly was a limited participant in practice, even a full participant occasionally. So I think that's maybe good evidence that this team is not trying to be nefarious or misleading. They are genuinely just kind of trying to follow what Chad's development has been. But you are right. In hindsight, with hindsight being 2020, it would have been better to 6-game him to start. And look, formalized competition and practice, is not permitted when a guy is on the 6-game. But is Chad Kelly able to, after practice, take the field and throw the ball around with some players and just kind of stay loose? Yes, that is permitted. So it's not like if you were on the 6-game, you can do literally nothing, right? It's quite common at CFL practices for guys who are on the 6-game to, run up and down the sideline and kind of test things out. They're just not able to participate in formalized drills, formalized sessions with the rest of the team on the field. So anyway, it's a weird situation in Toronto, certainly an adventure, and we'll have to wait and see what comes of Chad Kelly and the Boatmen. The Winnipeg Blue Bombers and BC Lions both suffered losses in Week 7, keeping them at 3 wins apiece. Which West Division team is in more trouble right now? And, come the end of the season, which one do you see making the playoffs?
I will answer the second part of that question first because I think it's the easiest. Both of these teams are going to make the playoffs because we're going to have a crossover this year.
All right, we got a crossover.
I think the Winnipeg Blue Bombers and BC Lions are both better than the Toronto Argonauts and the Ottawa Redblacks at this stage. I think it's going to be a fairly easy crossover race. The question is, which one's going to stay out west and which one is going to have to head out east? And it's a tough decision between these two teams. I would have said a few weeks ago that BC was clearly the weaker team. I still have some serious question marks about them as a unit. The way that their defense performed at the end of yesterday's game, I think, leaves you with a terrible taste in your mouth and a lot of questions going into their bye week. But the Winnipeg Blue Bombers have essentially peed down their leg in 3 straight games now. And to me, that is a little bit more concerning than the BC Lions, who, as much as they have struggled, are basically what I thought they were heading into the year. The Winnipeg Blue Bombers have looked like they have regressed. They have now potentially lost their starting quarterback. We don't know about the status of Zach Collaros or the nature of his removal from this week's game, and that scares me. So I'm going to say the Bombers, while they might still be the better team, are the team that's in more trouble at the current stage.
Yeah, when you look at some of the factors around these two clubs, one of them is the fact that the Bombers have already won the season series, which against BC.
Mm-hmm.
Like these two teams only met twice, and those games have already happened. Like they don't play again for the entire rest of the season, which is weird for divisional rivals. But the Bombers won both those games, so they've got the tiebreaker, and they've also got a better record, right? They've only played 6 games, they're 3-3. The Lions are finally getting their first bye week this week. They're 3-5. So that a lot is working into Winnipeg's favor. That said, I still think Nathan Rourke is arguably the best player in this league, and I like some of what I've seen from BC's defense. Obviously, they were miserable down the stretch in that fourth quarter against Hamilton, particularly on that last touchdown pass to Keandre Smith. I have no idea what the Lions were doing. I strongly suspect that there was a blown assignment from one of those players because the play call made quite literally no sense. I'm not an X's and O's expert, nor would I purport to be, but I'm pretty sure that when the third receiver to the field lines up in the red zone, there should be somebody opposite them, and then someone should at the very least try to make an effort to cover them once they run into the end zone, and neither of those things happened. So like pre-snap, there was a huge red flag where Bo Levi Mitchell's going, okay, I think the ball's going to Keandre. And then sure enough, after the snap, it's like, oh, yeah, Keandre and I could just play pitch and catch for the game-winning touchdown. That's easy peasy lemon squeezy. We're going to the win here. But just from the eyeball test the last few weeks, I think the Bombers are in big trouble, right? Like, they stubbed their toe in Calgary, week 5, losing by 21 points. You go, okay, this is a burn the film game. This happens. It's okay. Every team is entitled to one bad game. After a bye, you lose the second half of the home and home by 21 points, and you're going, okay, hold on. This is a big red flag. This team could be in trouble. And then to go on the road and get crushed by Nick Arbuckle. Like, no disrespect to Nick Arbuckle. Again, he played very well in that game. But they made Nick Arbuckle look like prime Bo Levi Mitchell with the way that he was able to pick apart their secondary. Very few contested catches, horrible tackling on the back end. And then Zach, of course, getting hurt again, this time with an undisclosed injury. I asked Mike O'Shea after the game, after he declined to comment on it, I said, can you at least tell us upper body, lower body? And he declined. So we have no idea what's going on with Zach yet. Hopefully we'll get at least a little bit of information this week, but obviously the Bombers like to keep this tight to their chest. I thought their offensive play calling was miserable. Brady Oliveira was rolling early in that game, and then they completely went away from him. Brady Oliveira was very political after the game, genuinely seemed unperturbed by the play calling. I will say he seemed quite upset by the play calling in the last few Grey Cups, where they went away from him for seemingly no reason. That was not the case this time. He did not seem very upset, which was interesting. But I also know that he is a huge fan and supporter of Jason Hogan, the team's offensive coordinator, who was his running back coach, of course, the last couple of years as he had MOP caliber seasons in Bomberland. So, I'll say this too. I got home. I flew home yesterday morning from Toronto, Monday morning, I should say. And my wife, we're just chatting about the trip and everything. And she says, well, how was the game? And I said, well, the Bombers got kicked and Zach got hurt. And she goes, didn't those things just happen? And I'm like, yeah. And she's like, oh, so it was just like the same game again. I'm like, yeah, pretty much. Only this time, instead of playing the top team in the CFL and the Calgary Stampeders, it happened against a one-win team in Toronto. So I think right now the Bombers are in a better situation because of the elements we've described with the season series, obviously with the record. But long term, I am more bullish on the BC Lions right now than I am on the Winnipeg Blue Bombers. This is now a 3-game sample size of the Winnipeg Blue Bombers not being competitive. Like, a 3-game losing skid doesn't super bother me if you're showing competitiveness, if you are showing, long periods of limited mistake football or even mistake-free football. That is not what we've gotten from the Winnipeg Blue Bombers. I think the play calling's been bad offensively. Zach Collaros has struggled terribly. He is now, by the way, negative on the season. He has more interceptions than touchdowns, 7 touchdowns to 8 picks. Obviously, that is not good enough. And then defensively, it's been a mess, an absolute mess for the last few weeks, which is shocking because this defense under Jordan Younger last year led the league in many categories, and they looked great to start the year in a couple games against the Lions. So I am in partial agreement with you, JC. But I do also, by the way, to answer the second part of the question, I do think both teams will make the playoffs. And I'll throw this out there. No discredit to the Montreal Alouettes and Hamilton Tiger Cats, who've been playing great football. But let's picture this for a second. Imagine BC finishes third in the West, the Bombers finish fourth and cross over. Is it possible that the Bombers are going to be the away team at their own Grey Cup? Because if they come through the East Division, they would be the visiting team at Princess Auto Stadium if they qualified for the Grey Cup game. Wouldn't that be the weirdest thing to ever happen?
It certainly would be the weirdest thing to ever happen, but I think you're getting a little bit ahead of yourself because Montreal Alouettes are a damn good team, and the Hamilton Tiger Cats might now, especially offensively, might be even better. So I think if you're going out east, that's going to be a really, really tough road. I mean, it would be unprecedented to even make the Grey Cup, let alone win it as a crossover team.
I didn't say anything about winning
it would be tough sledding.
I'm just saying, it is not impossible that this year's Grey Cup will be Winnipeg at Saskatchewan in Winnipeg, which is dumb, but possible. I'm just saying that's possible.
It is, and I can imagine the outrage from Bomber fans if the Raggers were in the Bombers locker room while the Bombers were playing in the game. I think people would lose their absolute minds for that entire week, even though it's entirely justified based on the way those things work. But it would be interesting to see the reaction.
And if I'm the Stamps or I'm the Riders or the Lions or heck, well, you can even throw the Edmonton Elks in there. It's not impossible. If I'm one of those teams and I'm the home team at the Grey Cup and the league or the Bombers come to me and say, hey, we're actually playing in this game too, could we please keep our home locker room? That would save us a lot of logistical hassle. My answer is hell to the no. I am taking the nice home locker room. There's a 0% chance you're keeping it. Too bad. We earned the home locker room. We are keeping the home locker room, and you can have fun in the visiting locker room, which, by the way, for visiting locker rooms is actually probably one of the better ones in the CFL, but is certainly nowhere near as nice as the home locker room with all the creature comforts that the Bombers have at home. But you never know. We are totally getting ahead of ourselves. It was just something that occurred to me as people were talking about a crossover, which and the standings. Less or so after Toronto's win this week, but certainly when you had two one-win teams in the East, it screams crossover. And I couldn't help but thinking, first of all, BC crossing over is a miserable situation because you're traveling so far. Winnipeg, just based on geography, I think would have a much easier time crossing over because those flights are not nearly as far. I mean, heck, it's actually closer to fly to Toronto than it is to fly to Vancouver for the Winnipeg Blue Bombers. And then I thought, oh my goodness, imagine this team got to play in a home Grey Cup game, but had to do it as an East Division team. Which ironically they've also done in Grey Cups, of course, is represented the East Division. It's a mess, JC, but it's a good mess.
The Ottawa Redblacks didn't make a coaching change during their bye week and will return to the field with Bob Dyce at the helm against the Calgary Stampeders with a 1-6 record. With another bye set for Week 13, how many of their next 4 games do the Redblacks have to win to get their season back on track and avoid any further conversation about Dyce's future?
I think the magic number is 2. This team, I mean, they can still make the playoffs, absolutely. Toronto playing really well against the Bombers hurts them for obvious reasons. They now trail the Argonauts by 2 points in the standings. And by the way, they also, on a head-to-head basis, are behind the 8 ball because they, of course, lost to the Argonauts in Week 4 by a score of 28-16. That is only one of 2 meetings between the two teams this season. So the season series between these clubs, which could be very important come playoff time, hangs in the balance as part of this 4-game run. I'll run down this 4-game run for you. So over the next 4 weeks, the next month, the Redblacks have versus Calgary, at Toronto, at Winnipeg, and then versus Edmonton. And the game at Winnipeg is a short week. So yes, the Blue Bombers have been struggling as of late. There's no question about that. But playing on a short week and doing that on the road for a second straight week is really tough. So I think that if you're the Ottawa Redblacks, you've got to win 2 of these games. I think the Toronto game is probably a must-win. If you win it by more than 12, you win the season series as well. That would arguably save their season right there. But I think you have to find a way to win 2 of these games. I think it's possible they can win all of them. I wouldn't count them out of any of these games. Obviously, when you're hosting Edmonton, you'd certainly hope that's a win based on how the Elks have played as of late. But if you only win 1 of these games, JC, if you fall to 2-9 and then you go into your Week 13 bye, I think that right there you go, okay, we basically now need to run the table to try to get to winning the rest of your 7 would get you to 9-9. If maybe you go 6-1 down the stretch, that gets you to 8-10. That's probably good enough for a playoff spot coming out of the East Division. I think at that point you make a coaching change. But I think if they can win 2, obviously you want to start this week against Calgary, but the Stamps have been playing good football and they're going to be real angry about the way that they coughed up that game late against the Alouettes. So I don't love their chances of getting that first win this week, but I think if they can win 2 of the next 4 or more, they're in decent shape. Less than that, there could be trouble.
I would put the number a little bit higher, Hodge. I would go with they need to win 3 of these games because to me, beating Toronto and Edmonton, while that would be great for the Redblacks, I think those are games that you have to expect to win. I think to truly have faith in Bob Dyce going forward, you need to win a game that you don't expect to win. And that means upsetting either Calgary or Winnipeg or both potentially in order to get to 3 of the 4. I think a 4-7 record in a crossover situation where the Lions are struggling, the Bombers might be struggling. I think that is a legitimate case for making the playoffs. You're still in the hunt. I think anything less than that becomes a little bit problematic. And I'm not saying this because I'm advocating for Bob Dyce to be fired. I hope he figures this out. I think Bob Dyce is a great coach. I have a lot of respect for him. But the reality is, The fan base is starting to turn against this Ottawa Redblacks organization right now. They have not been good enough, and despite the fact that they returned to the playoffs last year, Bob Dyce has a losing record as a head coach, and significantly so. It's not a tight margin. He has lost almost twice as much as he has won. So you can't keep going with the status quo if you slip that far down. I think you need a statement over these next 4 weeks that something is changing, because you brought in too much talent this offseason, particularly offensively, to justify these performances, right? You've got too much in that receiving core to be playing the way that the Ottawa Redblacks currently are. They need to show not just that they can get the job done in the games that you expect them to, but that they can exceed expectations and reach higher than what people think they are capable of.
Well, and I'd argue that maybe the how matters here as well as just the what. Like, for instance, if you play a really, really good game against Calgary, lose it by, a last-second field goal, and then you crush Toronto, you go into Winnipeg on a short week and you play really, really tight, narrow loss, and then you come back home and you crush Edmonton, like that's 2-2. I think Bob Dyce keeps his job all day. If in that 4-game run, like let's say, you get crushed by Calgary, you go to Toronto, you lose a heartbreaker, you go into Winnipeg, pick up a win on a short week, and then you play a really sloppy game and kind of eke out a victory against Edmonton, maybe that's a 2-2 that's not good enough to keep the job, right? So I'm not convinced the answer. I think 3 is a little bit high. I still think the answer is 2. But the how does matter, right? Like, for instance, I think a lot of people speculated that back in week 7, if the Red Blacks lost that game, Bob Dyce is gone. Well, yeah, they lost that game, but they also lost Drew Brown against a very good Hamilton team. And if Drew Brown stays healthy and finishes that game, it's entirely possible that the Red Blacks win. And it should be noted that the Red Blacks have only had Drew Brown for 2 entire games this year. I guess 3 if you count week 1. He was hurt week 1. He did finish that game hobbling on one leg. He played all of week 5 and 6. But he has missed all or part of more of their games this year than he has played. And that is a tough situation for any CFL team to be in, right? I mean, the Alouettes are a very good team. Well, they're 1-2 without Davis Alexander. So it's tough to win without your starter in any professional league, and this is certainly no exception in the CFL. It is now time for JC's Random Neg Lister.
Okay, we are going with a topical one this week, Hodge, because we've been talking about her on the podcast. The Edmonton Elks had a lot of trouble protecting the quarterback this week. So what might there be on their neg list in ways of an immediate solution? Is there an offensive lineman out there that they could sign tomorrow and bring in and might improve their pass protection? Well, let me suggest Marcus Weir out of Montana State. This is a guy who was an absolute stud for one of the top programs in the FCS, a 2-time All-American. In 2023, he played right tackle. He was Pro Football Focus highest graded offensive tackle in all of Division I college football. He moved to guard, mostly because that's where people saw him as a pro the next season. And he was a top 5 rated guard in the entire FCS the next year. Only 9 pressures and no sacks allowed in his entire college career. But he's an even better run blocker. This guy gets after it. He's a bully with his hands and feet. He's a fluid mover. Why isn't he in the NFL, you ask? Well, he's 6'2" and 5'8", 301 pounds. That's not great size. But more importantly, he has 31 and 5/8 inch arms. That is disqualifying for most NFL teams. Even for an interior lineman, they're looking for at least 33. For tackles, they're looking for 34, 35, and above. These are incredibly short arms, and that keeps him off an NFL roster. I think he's good enough as a mover, as a fundamental football player, that he can overcome those challenges if given the opportunity in the CFL. And as an added bonus, I know the Edmonton Elks are going with Cody Fajardo for now, but if you were to go back to Trey Ford, there may be nobody more qualified, Hodge, in all of football to block for a mobile quarterback like Trey Ford, because Marcus Weir had to protect for Tommy Mellott at Montana State, and Trey Ford runs a 4.4. Mellott ran a 4.39 and ran all over the park. So Marcus Weir knows how to handle that. He's a guy who should be on your radar if you're an Elks fan.
Well, and it doesn't say here, JC, but was he born in America?
He was indeed, yes. He's from Montana.
So he must be great then. not like these awful Canadian linemen that we have. Yeah, he must be great. He must be way better than every player in the CFL because he's American. It's now time for Hodge's heritage moment. On this day in 1984, Arnie Weinmeister was elected to the Pro Football Hall of Fame. The Ryan, Saskatchewan native played 6 seasons in the NFL from 1948 to 1953 before finishing his career with a 2-year run with the BC Lions. The 6'4", 235-pound defensive tackle, can you believe they used to have 235-pound defensive tackles, by the way, made 4 consecutive Pro Bowls and is one of only 2 Canadian members of the Pro Football Hall of Fame, alongside Bronco Nagurski. Weinmeister passed away due to congestive heart failure at the age of 77. JC, can you believe that there is a Pro Football Hall of Famer from Ryan, Saskatchewan?
It's pretty hard to wrap your head around. I mean, I'll be honest, I haven't ground the Arnie Weinmeister tape recently, so I can't tell you much about him as a player, but certainly an incredible accomplishment to go from those humble beginnings to the Pro Football Hall of Fame. I just ask one thing, Hodge. Can you say his last name like 3 or 4 more times? I'm just going to record it so I can play it before I go to sleep.
Well, so I don't know how he said it, but this is a German last name. It would be pronounced Weinmeister. Wein means wine.
I love it when you speak German to me.
I don't think anyone has ever asked them to speak German for them. Oh, I speak Schmetterling. Oh, yeah, Kugelschreiber. Oh, yeah. And Meister means like Mr. or Master. So evidently he hailed from a family of, I would guess, winemakers. And for anyone who thinks I'm disparaging German, I have German heritage and I speak the language. So I am teasing it as an insider, not as an outsider. And I, through the CFL's global initiative, had the opportunity to speak a little bit of German to some German players, but admittedly, my German is rusty. I don't get to use it a lot, so I don't speak a lot of it because I don't want to embarrass myself. But yeah, Weinmeister, I don't know if it wouldn't surprise me if he went by Weinmeister just because that's anglicized, but the W in German is spoken like a V in English. Wein, not wine. This is why Jonathan Taves is pronounced Taves, not Toes.
Oh,
just an aside.
I didn't realize that was a German last name. Now we're off on a tangent.
And also, we're going deeper down the tangent. In German, there is what's called an Umlaut, which is 2 dots that go above some vowels to kind of soften them. Mm-hmm. And the way to anglicize that is by removing the umlaut and adding an O afterwards. So, for instance, it kind of softens the vowel. Like instead of, because without an umlaut, without the E, Tows would be like Tovs, but it's Tivs, or like it softens the vowel with the umlaut. So that is why you often see OE in German names, is because they had to remove an umlaut, something that doesn't exist in the English language. So an anglicized German last name will often have OE instead of O umlaut. See what you can learn on the 3DownNation podcast?
Yeah, come for the football, stay for the linguistics, and is it etymology for words, or is that bugs? No, that's entomology. I don't know. We're not talking about bugs. I don't know.
We're not talking about bugs. We're talking about German punctuation, something that's way more interesting. It's now time for the 3-minute drill. JC, you reported the BC Lions have started renovating their practice facility. What kind of improvements are expected?
Well, the first thing is they're going to create an outdoor temporary building to put their training facility in terms of their weight room and everything, so that they can renovate the inside. They're going to redo the locker room, redo the weight room, expand the player lounge, and essentially beef up that entire facility to bring it up to the standards expected in the CFL. This is a temporary fix. It's not in lieu of getting a new practice facility. The BC Lions still desperately need that, but Amar Doman is willing to spend this money on essentially a lost cause just to improve in the short term for the players, because as we saw in the CFLPA report card, that practice facility is a big problem holding this team back. Deshaun Amos received a maximum fine for his hit on Drew Brown, which saw the crown of his helmet strike the bottom of Brown's face mask. Was that the right call by Commissioner Stuart Johnston?
Yeah, this is what I said on the show last week. This should be a max fine. Amos apologized. Brown accepted the apology. Obviously, we don't want hits like this in the CFL, but I think this one's been handled fine by all parties. After striking a new trade deal with Manitoba, BC Premier David Eby joked that Nathan Rourke is off limits to the Blue Bombers. Was that a smart condition of the deal?
First of all, I think it's pronounced Eby, at least in this province where he is Premier. But it is an interesting condition to the deal. Certainly going to win him a lot of favors here. I just don't think that Wab Canoe really wants Nathan Rourke, given how he's playing against the Winnipeg Blue Bombers. That's been the one CFL team that Rourke has struggled against every single time.
But that should be the Bombers want him, because if he's on Winnipeg, he doesn't have to play Winnipeg.
Yeah, but wouldn't you want your opponent to have a quarterback that struggles against you? You're taking him away. Maybe Jeremiah Mazzoli is incredible against Winnipeg. We don't know. We haven't seen it yet.
I guess Jeremiah Mazzoli start an entire game against Merlin?
Yes, we did see it. Sorry, correction there. We did see it. It was not good.
Though if you go back in history, Mazzoli almost beat the Bombers in the Grey Cup in 2021.
That's true.
In relief of in that game. So
maybe it's Chase Bryce who is really the Bombers' kryptonite, and we're trying to keep him off the field.
And we'll never know.
Jose Maltos hit the longest field goal in Montreal Alouettes history on his 57-yard game winner in Calgary. How impressive is that from the Mexican kicker?
Unbelievably so, right? And with that very controversial ruling on what was initially a catch and then called not a catch by the command center or the replay center, I thought Maltos did not only the Alouettes a big favor, but the CFL a big favor, because that non-catch I think was a bit of a silly call. And then for Maltos, like had he gone out and missed it and the Stampeders win, that's all anyone's talking about. Well, he goes and he gets the dub for the Alouettes. And it's like, okay, we don't have to talk about the lousy call anymore. So Maltos not only did the Owls a favor, I think he did the league office a favor as well. McLeod Bethel Thompson got a little salty after he led the Alouettes to a win in Calgary, telling the TSN panel not to say anything good about him. Was he right to throw some shade?
McLeod Bethel Thompson is a little bit like licorice to me, because the best version of him is salty. But I don't think he was justified in this criticism. Like, nobody was saying he was entirely washed. He didn't play well the last couple of weeks. And frankly, in this game, it's not as if he lit the world on fire either. The Alouettes needed 3 field goals in that fourth quarter. I think you would have liked to see him lead a touchdown drive on at least one of those. I like that he gets fired up. It's great for the media. It's great to drive interest in the CFL. But I think the panel was entirely justified in everything that they said about him. Drew Brown was a full participant in practice with the Redblacks on Sunday, which seems like a strong sign that he'll start on Thursday. Is that a relief?
It is a relief, yes. This league needs its quarterbacks to be healthy, just like any professional league. And Drew Brown certainly gives the Ottawa Redblacks their best chance to win. It should be noted he is winless as a starter this year. Dustin Crum has a win, but I don't think anybody thinks that Drew Brown is less of a quarterback than Dustin Crum. He is the best option for the Redblacks to get their second win of the season, and I know fans in our nation are desperately hoping that that can happen this week against the Calgary Stampeders. For JC Abbott, I'm John Hodge. We thank you as always for listening to the 3DownNation podcast. Our picks will be back this week, so stay tuned for those. Though after a 1-3 week in week 8 and some not very good results, admittedly, on the season by myself, I think you'd be better off picking against me than with me, but who knows? I know I was choked last night because I had BC to win and cover, and I was feeling so good about that until about the 3-minute warning. And then, the Ticats did their thing. Regardless, we'll see you next week, folks. Enjoy the games.